They didn't want you to think like this. But now you will. They say intelligence is something you're born with. A gift. A number. Something fixed in childhood and sealed in your DNA. But what if that was never true? What if there was a formula? Simple, hidden, and banned, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. The truth is, the world doesn't want you to think in systems. It wants you to memorize facts. Regurgitate. Obey. The people who designed your education system weren't building geniuses. They were building followers. But buried beneath it all, scattered in whispers from banned books and broken systems, is the formula they never wanted you to know. Visual thinking plus pattern decoding plus constant feedback equals exponential intelligence. Not IQ. Not test scores. Not facts. Profits. Visual thinking isn't about doodling. It's about seeing concepts in motion. Mentally watching ideas instead of reciting them. It's the difference between memorizing math and seeing the equation twist and fold like origami in your mind. Between reading a historical date and feeling the weight of time pass like a slow-moving storm. Pattern decoding is what your brain craves. That's why your eyes scan clouds for faces and your mind finds rhythm in noise. But no one ever taught you to use that instinct on ideas. On behavior. On economics, biology, language. When you learn to track patterns across chaos, intelligence stops being abstract. It becomes a reflex. And feedback, real feedback, isn't a grade or a gold star. It's resistance. It's friction. It's pushing your brain against ideas that feel just out of reach until they snap into clarity. This is the hidden formula for building a mind that adapts, mutates, and evolves. And they buried it. Because a mind that can evolve on command is a mind that doesn't obey. They teach you that genius is rare, that intelligence is inherited, that some people are born with the gift, and the rest of us are just here to admire them. But that idea, it's a lie, a carefully planted myth, and it's one of the most effective pieces of mental conditioning in modern history. Because if intelligence is something you're born with, then you'll never try to build it. The truth is, genius isn't lightning, it's architecture. It's not a flash of insight. It's layers of thought, stacked intentionally, trained consistently, and refined over time. Every high-functioning brain you admire, Einstein, Tesla, Da Vinci, they didn't just think differently. They trained differently. But training the brain doesn't look like what school taught you. It's not about worksheets, grades, or sitting still. Real brain training is messy. It's chaotic. It involves chasing questions without clear answers, wrestling with impossible problems, and breaking your mind open just enough to let something new in. But here's why they don't tell you this. Because once you realize intelligence is built, you start to see how rigged the system is. You start to question why no one taught you how to think in pictures. Why no one taught you how to connect ideas instead of memorizing them. Why the people in charge fear curiosity more than failure. They tell you genius is genetic. Because it's safer if you believe you can't become one. But you can. Because intelligence isn't found. It's constructed. One thought layer at a time. You probably remember school as a place of structure. Bells ringing. Rows of desks. Quiet hallways. Obedient answers. But what if it wasn't just outdated? What if the system was engineered to keep you mentally weak? This isn't some fringe theory. It's documented history. The foundation of modern public education traces back to 19th century Prussia. A system created not to raise visionaries or innovators, but to produce compliant workers. Soldiers. Factory minds. Citizens who followed orders, respected authority, and never questioned the system that shaped them. The structure of school was never about intelligence. It was about standardization. Every student treated the same content, the same timing, the same narrow path. If your brain didn't fit the mold, it was marked as a problem, not a possibility. Think about it. You weren't rewarded for thinking differently. You were punished for it. You weren't allowed to skip ahead, ask too many questions, or solve problems your own way. Even when you were right, if your method didn't follow the prescribed steps, you were told it was wrong. You were trained to obey, not to think. And curiosity? It had a time limit. Creativity was allowed, but only within the assignment. Genius was tolerated, but only if it stayed quiet. But here's the darkest part. Your brain wasn't just understimulated, it was conditioned to fear friction, to associate confusion with failure, to believe that if something doesn't come easily, it must not be meant for you. In reality, your brain is designed to grow through tension. Intelligence blooms in discomfort. When you're confused, your neurons fire more. When you struggle, your mental models expand. But school taught you the opposite. It made thinking feel like punishment. And now, as an adult, you're left with the aftermath. A brain that was told to sit still, be quiet, and wait to be told what to do. But deep down, the raw potential is still there, buried under years of standardization, waiting for you to break the format, to relearn how to learn, finally, to rebuild the mind they trained you to suppress. You've been trained to think in words, sentences, definitions, memorize terms, logical steps. But here's the secret. The smartest people in the world don't think in language. They think in movies. This is the simulation method, a banned brain hack used by innovators, athletes, military strategists, and world-class thinkers. Instead of thinking about something, they mentally simulate it, like watching a film unfold inside their minds. Because the human brain wasn't designed for language. It evolved to sense movement, to track threats, to visualize outcomes. When you simulate an idea, your brain lights up as if you're actually experiencing it, stops being theory, and becomes reality. And here's why this matters. Most people try to solve problems by talking to themselves. Smart people watch them happen. Instead of thinking, "What should I say in that interview?" they mentally walk into the room, sit down, hear the questions, and watch themselves respond. Instead of memorizing a fact, they simulate the moment they'll need to use it. They see the equation folding. They see the mechanism moving. They see the pattern shifting. This is how genius builds instinct. It's not just about memory, it's about mental pre-experience. When you simulate something enough times, your brain begins to treat it as familiar, comfortable, automatic. It's how top athletes hit the perfect shot before they've ever taken it. How strategists predict 5 moves ahead without hesitation. How creatives invent solutions no one else can see, because they're watching it unfold before anyone else even starts thinking. But here's the part they don't teach. This method isn't reserved for the elite. It's not genetic. It's not magical. It's a skill, a tool, one they hoped you'd never figure out. Because once you stop thinking in sentences and start thinking in moving pictures, your brain stops being a filing cabinet and becomes a weapon. Close your eyes and try this. Imagine a light bulb. Not the word, not the concept. Actually see it. The texture of the glass, the way it reflects light, the glowing filament inside. Now rotate it. Zoom in. Shatter it. Watch the pieces fall. If you can do that, you've just used a mental operating system that most people have never been taught to access. This is Hypervisual Encoding, a banned brain hack that turns your memory into a high-speed visualization engine. And once you unlock it, your brain stops relying on language and starts thinking in pure structure. Most people try to remember things the way they read them. Words in a line, a list of disconnected facts. But that's not how memory is built. That's how memory breaks. The brain wasn't designed to store text. It was designed to see, map, connect. Visual encoding is what your mind was doing before you could speak. It's how you learn to recognize faces, predict motion, sense danger. But in school, you were told to replace that power with passive memorization. To forget your instincts and think in lines instead of shapes. Hypervisual thinkers do the opposite. They turn ideas into motion. They assign concepts to places, objects, textures, even sounds. A math formula becomes a moving machine. A language rule becomes a bridge made of parts. A strategy becomes a city map with shifting pieces. They don't recall information, they walk through it. And here's the real advantage. The brain remembers visuals 1,000 times faster than text. It stores shape, movement, emotion, and connection all at once. So while others are flipping through pages in their minds, you're watching it play out like a scene. This is the kind of thinking used by competitive memory champions, elite chess players, creative visionaries, and high-speed decision makers. Not because they're gifted, but because they were never told to stop seeing. So ask yourself, what if the smartest version of you was already there, just waiting for you to switch the system back on? You've been taught to look for answers. But the people who reshape the world, they start with questions no one else dares to ask. This is the what-if technique. A banned mental framework that unlocks abstract intelligence by forcing your brain into unfamiliar territory. It's not about being right. It's about pulling your thinking out of its comfort zone until something impossible starts to make sense. Because here's what most people never realize. Your brain doesn't just run on information. It runs on contrast, on surprise, on contradiction. So when you ask something absurd, like, what if gravity could be turned off? What if emotions were stored like files? What if humans could see time instead of space? Your brain doesn't shut down. It starts searching. It maps patterns, builds analogies, pulls from memory, fuses ideas that have never touched before. This is how radical innovation is born. The most brilliant minds didn't follow formulas. They broke them. Einstein imagined riding a beam of light. Da Vinci sketched flying machines 400 years too early. Musk asked how rockets could land themselves. What if is the entry point to a new mental dimension. It's a kind of cognitive rebellion, where logic bends and creativity expands. But the system discouraged this kind of thinking, because it's messy, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and worst of all, ungradable. So you were taught to stop asking strange questions, to focus on the answers at the back of the book, to think inside lines someone else already drew. But the what-if technique is how you build new lines, new models, new realities. Because the moment your brain starts working on a question that has no clear answer, is the moment it stops repeating the past and starts inventing the future. You've probably been told that struggle means you're doing it wrong. That if something feels hard, you're not smart enough. That if you don't get it quickly, you never will. But what if that's not just wrong? What if it's the exact opposite of how intelligence grows? This is the truth behind impossible questions. A banned brain hack that uses mental discomfort as a weapon. Not pain, not confusion, but deliberate, focused struggle, designed to stretch your thinking beyond what you thought it could handle. Because here's how the brain actually works. When you face a question that has no clear answer, your brain can't rely on memory. It has to build. It has to connect things it's never connected before. It has to forge a solution in real time. And in doing that, it creates entirely new neural pathways. That's not just learning. That's evolution. So when you ask yourself something like, how would I explain gravity to someone with no concept of space? How could you teach math without using numbers? What if time doesn't move forward? Your brain struggles. And in that struggle it rewires. This is how high-level thinkers train. They don't study for answers. They hunt for friction. They seek out mental territory that makes them sweat. Because they know that real intelligence isn't what you know. It's how far you're willing to go into what you don't. But the system told you otherwise. It told you confusion was a sign of weakness. That the smartest people just get it. That if you have to work hard to understand something, maybe it's not for you. That's a lie. Struggle is where the fire starts. And impossible questions are the match. Because every time your brain fights to make sense of something that doesn't fit the rules, it becomes the kind of brain that starts rewriting the rules. There's a moment when your brain feels like it's drowning. Too much data. Too many thoughts. Ideas crashing into each other. You can't focus. You can't think straight. Everything feels overloaded. And weirdly, that's exactly the point. This is overload mode. A banned brain hack that uses mental saturation not to break the mind but to upgrade it. Most systems when overwhelmed shut down. But the brain adapts. When exposed to too much complexity, it starts looking for higher patterns. It begins to cluster, simplify, compress data into new forms. Like a computer under pressure, it reprograms itself, building faster pathways, cutting unnecessary loops, creating new systems just to survive the wait. This is how breakthroughs happen. Not in silence but in noise. Not in calm but in chaos. You flood your senses with high-density inputs. Complex ideas, contradicting theories, unsolved problems. Not to solve them all immediately but to force your brain to reorganize. To evolve. Athletes train by pushing muscles to the edge of failure. Your mind works the same way. When it's overwhelmed, it doesn't give up. It upgrades, if you let it. But the system never let you get to that point. You were told to slow down, stay in your lane, focus on one thing at a time. Don't go too fast. Don't go too deep. Don't confuse yourself. But confusion is where growth begins. Overload mode is the cognitive equivalent of lifting something far too heavy and discovering that your body learned how to carry it anyway. So the next time your brain feels like it's spinning, don't shut it off. That might be the exact moment it's trying to build the next version of you. Your brain is a machine, but no one ever gave you the manual. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion, every reaction, none of it is random. It's code. Neural instructions fired through a pattern you didn't choose. And once you understand that, you realize something unsettling. You can reprogram it. This is mental programming. A banned brain hack that treats the mind not as a mystery but as a system. One that can be edited, reconditioned, and rewired on command. Your habits, code. Your fears, code. Your internal voice telling you you're not good enough? Just a corrupted subroutine running in the background. The system you grew up in never wanted you to think this way. It wanted you to believe you are your programming. That your limits are personality traits. That your anxiety is just who you are. That your laziness is built in. But everything the brain does, it does because it learned to. Which means it can learn something else. Mental programming works like this. You feed your brain new instructions, deliberately, repeatedly, and with emotional intensity. You pair thoughts with motion. You replace language. You create internal imagery stronger than memory. And over time the old code breaks. The new one takes over. This isn't affirmation. It's architecture. And it's how some of the most effective minds on Earth reshape their internal world. Until it bends to their control. But no one taught you this. Because a programmable mind is dangerous. It means motivation on demand. Confidence that can't be shaken. The ability to rebuild your identity without asking permission. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped running the code you were given and started writing your own? There's a strange trait shared by almost every genius, disruptor, and outlier in history. It's not intelligence, not creativity, not luck. It's defiance. Because here's the truth they never taught you. The smartest people in the room aren't the ones following the rules. They're the ones who understand them well enough to know when to ignore them. This is the heart of the next banned brain hack. Geniuses don't obey systems. They build their own. The rules you were taught, how to study, how to behave, how to think, were never designed to create mastery. They were designed to create predictability. School rewarded correctness. Society rewards agreement. Even your own mind has been conditioned to seek safety in structure. But structure doesn't create breakthroughs. It creates boxes. And genius lives outside those boxes. The most innovative thinkers didn't just color outside the lines. They questioned why the lines existed in the first place. They skipped steps, asked forbidden questions, challenged traditions so deeply that the world labeled them crazy, right up until it didn't. Because once you understand that the rules were written by people no smarter than you, they lose their grip. You stop asking, "Am I allowed?" You start asking, "Does it work?" This is how mental freedom begins. Not with rebellion for its own sake, but with strategic disobedience. You learn the system so you can step beyond it. Not to break everything, but to build something better, faster, yours. And once you start doing that, once you realize that rules are just someone else's habits, you stop seeing genius as rare. You see it for what it really is: a refusal to play small in a world that taught you to shrink. There's a window of time each day when your brain is at its most vulnerable, most programmable, most absorbent, and most people waste it. This is the morning hack. A banned brain technique that rewires how your mind functions by using the first 30 minutes after waking up. Right after you open your eyes, your brain is still cycling through theta and alpha waves. The same waves linked to deep learning, creativity, and subconscious access. You're not fully conscious yet. The walls between imagination and reality are thin. Your inner critic hasn't come online. And in that fragile space, whatever you focus on gets embedded deep. This is where most people lose the game before it even starts. They grab their phones, open social media, check emails, absorb randomness, other people's opinions, stress, urgency, noise. And without realizing it, they're training their brain, first thing in the morning, to react, to compare, to chase, to lose control. But the ones who understand this hack, they engineer their input. They visualize. They journal. They simulate. They ask impossible questions, read one powerful sentence, or review their personal code. They speak new thoughts into a brain that hasn't yet remembered who it used to be. Because in those first minutes, your identity is soft clay. Your thoughts are wet cement. And whatever you imprint becomes the blueprint for the rest of the day. It's not magic. It's neurology. The chemicals are different. The filters are off. And the version of you that wakes up tomorrow is being sculpted in silence today. So tomorrow, when you open your eyes, don't ask, "What do I need to do?" Ask, "Who do I want to become?" And build it before the world remembers to stop you. Your muscles can be trained. Your endurance can be trained. So why did no one ever tell you your thinking speed can be trained too? This is the intelligence sprint. A banned brain hack that pushes your cognitive system into high gear, forcing faster connections, quicker insights, and sharper decision-making. Not with years of slow repetition, but with focused bursts of controlled overload. Because intelligence isn't just depth. It's speed of synthesis, how quickly you can take scattered ideas and snap them into something useful. And here's how the sprint works. You flood your mind with high-level material, complex theories, abstract concepts, layered patterns, and set a time limit. No overthinking. No pauses. You give your brain just enough pressure to force clarity. You don't wait for the perfect answer. You build the mental reflex of clarity under pressure. And the result? You get faster. Not in speech. In structure. You start to think in frameworks instead of fragments. You spot patterns where others see noise. You simplify what confuses everyone else. It's how elite minds prepare. It's how master strategists, speed learners, and polymaths build an edge. But the system discouraged this kind of training. It told you to slow down, focus on one thing, don't rush. Because it feared what might happen if your brain became fast enough to challenge the pace of the system itself. And here's the real secret. You don't need a higher IQ. You need higher RPM, revolutions per minute of thought. And that doesn't take a lifetime to build. It takes a few sprints a day. Because the mind is not a warehouse. It's a motor. And once you learn how to floor it, there's no going back to first gear. Close your eyes and imagine you're standing in a moment that hasn't happened yet. You're walking into the room. The temperature, the light, the weight of the silence. You see where people are sitting. You hear what someone says. You feel your body responding, not just with words but with presence, confidence, precision. And the craziest part? You've never been here before. This is mental simulation. A band brain technique that turns imagination into a tool for real-world mastery. Most people use their mind to remember. The smartest people use it to pre-live. Your brain can't fully distinguish between something vividly imagined and something actually experienced. So when you mentally simulate a situation, fully, repeatedly, and with emotional weight, your brain begins to treat it like memory. Like training. You're not guessing anymore. You're rehearsing a future reality. Athletes do this instinctively. Surgeons walk through a procedure in their minds before ever picking up a tool. Negotiators, speakers, leaders, they pre-run the moment. Not because they're trying to control it, but because they're teaching their brain. This is where we belong. You see, anxiety is mental simulation too, but it's uncontrolled. It's passive. It runs in the background, hijacking your thoughts. But when you choose what to simulate, when you build it intentionally, you're not reacting to the future. You're constructing it. The system never taught you this because it doesn't want you to realize how powerful your mind already is. It wants you reacting, hoping, winging it, not running mental drills like a master of time. So the next time you're heading into something that matters, stop hoping it'll go well. Pre-live it, shape it. And then when the moment finally arrives, you'll feel like you've already been there, because you have. You've been told to aim high. But what if your brain was never meant to aim high? What if it was built to aim beyond? This is the 10x method. A band brain hack that rewires your internal scale of possibility by asking one simple question. What would this look like if it were 10 times bigger? Not twice as good. Not slightly improved. 10 times. Because the human brain adapts to scale. The bigger the problem, the more creative your thinking becomes. You're no longer optimizing what already exists. You're forced to abandon old systems entirely. Let's say you're trying to improve your focus. You could try breathing exercises. Or you could ask, what would it take to have 10x the focus of an average person? Now you're thinking like a neuroscientist, a monk, a cognitive engineer. You're out of the fix-it mindset and into the realm of designing a new brain. This is how breakthroughs happen. 10x thinking doesn't just make things bigger. It makes your mental architecture evolve. You stop looking at problems as obstacles and start seeing them as systems to rewire. You don't ask how to succeed in the game. You ask how to rewrite the rules, or build an entirely new game. And here's the twist. Even if you fall short of 10x, you'll land somewhere no one else was even aiming. The system never wanted you to think like this. It trained you to shoot for slightly better, a higher grade, a slightly better job, a marginal improvement. But 10x thinking breaks that ceiling. It shatters the false limits they taught you. Because once you train your brain to stretch into impossible space, you'll realize most of your limits were just fences someone else built. And your mind was always meant to run free. You sit down to work. You know what needs to be done. But instead you scroll. You hesitate. You stare. You tell yourself, just a few more minutes, and you wait for motivation to show up. But it doesn't. This is the trap of mental resistance. The lie of laziness. And it's one of the most misunderstood blockers in human performance. Here's the truth. Laziness isn't real. At least not the way you've been taught to believe. What you call laziness is usually one of two things: fear of failure or lack of clarity. And both of those are programmed. The system trained you to freeze when something feels hard, to avoid discomfort, to confuse friction with incompetence. You weren't taught to lean in, you were taught to back off the moment your brain had to work. But there's a band brain hack that flips that response in less than 60 seconds. It's called the activation threshold. Here's how it works. Your brain resists starting not because it can't do the task but because it overestimates the effort it will take. It predicts stress. It anticipates failure. And it shuts down before you even begin. But if you break the first 20 to 30 seconds of inertia, just by starting, a chemical shift happens. Dopamine rises. Focus sharpens. The task goes from impossible to automatic. You've crossed the threshold. The trick? Don't aim for finishing. Don't even aim for progress. Just aim for motion. Open the document. Set the timer. Take the first step. You'll feel the resistance kick. Good. That's the ignition. Most people spend hours trying to feel ready. The smartest people know that action creates readiness. Because your brain isn't waiting for permission. It's waiting for a signal. And once you give it that, once you prove you're serious, everything that felt heavy starts to move. You ever wonder why your mind feels sharp one day and foggy the next? Why sometimes you're on fire, thinking clearly, making connections, absorbing ideas, and other times it feels like your thoughts are moving through mud? This isn't randomness. This is mental atrophy. And it happens when intelligence isn't reinforced. Your brain isn't static. It's alive, dynamic, electrical. Every insight you have, every breakthrough, every pattern you decode, if it's not used, it starts to fade. This is the forgotten truth about intelligence. If you don't train it, you lose it. Just like muscle. Just like language. Just like skill. But the system never taught you to think this way. It made you believe that once you learn something, it's stored forever. That you could pass a test and walk away with knowledge locked in place. But real intelligence doesn't work like storage. It works like circuits. And circuits corrode when they're left untouched. So what happens over time? You stop questioning things you used to explore. You avoid discomfort. You default to what's easy. And slowly, the potential you once had calcifies into routine. But here's the good news. Mental strength is always rebuildable. All it takes is reactivating those dormant layers. Pushing your thoughts into tension, challenge, and unfamiliar structure again. Even 5 minutes a day of mental resistance can reignite entire regions of your cognitive map. Because genius isn't just about what you know. It's about what you continue to sharpen. And in a world that wants you dull and distracted, choosing to train your mind daily is a radical act. So ask yourself, how much of your intelligence is asleep right now, waiting for you to bring it back online? You walk into a crowded room. Within seconds, your brain picks up on the vibe. Who's in charge? Who's pretending? Who's uncomfortable? You notice micro-expressions, body shifts, tones of voice, before anyone says a word. You didn't think your way into that awareness. You felt it. That's pattern recognition at work. And it's one of the most powerful, underrated forms of intelligence your mind possesses. This isn't logic. It's deeper. Older. It's the part of your brain designed to detect rhythm in chaos, structure in noise, patterns in behavior that even you don't know you're tracking. Most of the time it works in silence, surfacing as instinct, intuition, or that eerie feeling of "I've seen this before." And here's the brain hack. You can train it. Not with textbooks, but with exposure, observation, and mindful reflection. Genius isn't always a lightning bolt. It's noticing the shape of things, the rhythm of a conversation, the pace of an argument, the loop inside a system that keeps repeating until someone finally sees it. Mathematicians do this with numbers. Musicians do it with sound. Entrepreneurs do it with markets. Visionaries do it with people. They see the patterns no one else notices, because they've trained their minds to zoom out, watch longer, and trust the signal hiding inside the noise. But here's why the system never taught you this. Because pattern recognition doesn't lead to obedience. It leads to insight. And insight leads to disruption. Once you start spotting the loops, the manipulations, the unspoken rules, you start breaking them. And once you start breaking them, you stop being predictable. You start being powerful. Most people think genius is about answers, about speed, about facts. But the real ones, the deep thinkers, the outliers, the architects of impossible ideas, they all share one invisible trait. They see everything differently. This is the shift from intelligence as effort to genius as a way of seeing. This is what we call genius as a lifestyle. A banned brain hack that transforms intelligence from something you use occasionally into something you live constantly. It's not about how many books you've read or how fast you can solve a puzzle. It's about how you interpret reality itself. Genius minds don't walk into a room and see a table, a chair, a ceiling fan. They see systems, materials, flow. They observe patterns in body language. They feel tension in silence. They notice the unnoticed. They don't wait for learning opportunities. They create them in every moment. Watching a stranger becomes an experiment in psychology. Hearing a song becomes an exercise in pattern recognition. A walk through the city becomes a lesson in engineering, rhythm, and human behavior. Because they don't turn on their brain when it's time to think. It's always on. This kind of perception can't be taught in school. It comes from choosing to interact with the world like it's a living riddle. And the deeper you go, the more it feeds itself. You begin to crave complexity, to see connections in chaos, to search for what no one else is even looking for. And suddenly, genius stops being a moment. It becomes a lens that sharpens with time, that stretches with tension, and that eventually becomes so clear. You wonder how you ever saw the world any other way. Because when intelligence becomes how you see everything, you don't just get smarter. You get unrecognizable. You're lying in bed, mind racing. Not with deep thoughts or wild ideas, just loops. Tiny useless loops. What did they mean by that? Did I forget something? Why didn't I say something different? You replay moments, rewind conversations, predict outcomes that haven't even happened. You're thinking, but going nowhere. This is the trap of thought loops. A glitch in your brain system where analysis turns into paralysis. And the worst part? The smarter you are, the deeper you fall into it. Most people mistake these loops for reflection. They think overthinking is just being careful or thoughtful. But in reality, it's a mental cage. Your brain isn't processing. It's spiraling. And here's the paradox. The longer you loop, the weaker your decisions become. You start to doubt, delay, rationalize. And eventually, you forget what the original thought even was. But there's a banned brain hack to break it. It's not about stopping the thoughts. It's about interrupting the pattern. Here's how it works. You introduce a disruptive mental action. Something small but deliberate that shifts the gear inside your head. It can be a deep breath followed by a verbal command like reset. It can be visualizing your thoughts as a spinning wheel, then watching it grind to a halt. It can be writing the thought down once, then drawing a line through it. Because the brain follows momentum. And the second you break that loop, even by an inch, it loses power. Over time, you learn to recognize the loop faster. Not because you've silenced your thoughts, but because you've trained your mind to move forward. Not in circles. This is what high-functioning minds learn to master. Not just deep thinking, but clean exits. Because the goal isn't to stop thinking. It's to know when the thought has already served its purpose. And walk away before it starts thinking you. Everyone wants to be smart, focused, but no one talks about what intelligence feels like when it gets too heavy. There's a side to brilliance that people don't show. The one where your mind won't turn off, where every thought leads to another, where the volume of the world feels like it's always turned up too loud. This is the dark side of intelligence. A banned perspective most people never speak aloud. Because we've been trained to glorify genius, to envy it. But few understand the cost. The deeper you think, the more disconnected you can become. You start to notice things others don't. The flaws in logic. The tension in people's words. The gaps in systems no one else sees. And over time, that kind of vision can isolate you. You sit in rooms and feel like no one's really there. You try to explain what you see and people look at you like you're unraveling. You start to feel like maybe you are. Because real intelligence doesn't just illuminate, it fractures. It pulls you away from simplicity, away from surface-level comfort, into questions that never end. Some of the sharpest minds in history walked that edge. Tesla, Newton, Gödel. They didn't just think deeply. They spiraled into obsession, isolation, madness. Because when your brain sees too much, feels too much, loops too hard, can become its own trap. That's why true genius isn't just about cognitive power. It's about mental structure, framework, recovery, stillness between the storms. Because if you don't learn how to manage the fire, eventually it consumes you. So yes, intelligence is a gift, but without balance, even the brightest minds can burn themselves out from the inside. You've probably been told that intelligence is about logic, equations, strategy, precision. But that's only half the story. Because some of the smartest people you'll ever meet can't handle a single hard conversation. They fall apart under pressure. They sabotage relationships, misunderstand tone, collapse under criticism. That's the missing piece. It's called emotional intelligence. And without it, raw intellect means nothing. This isn't about being nice or soft. It's about recognizing emotional data in real time, in yourself and others, then using it as information instead of reaction. High EQ isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about naming it, decoding it, tracking its shape. You feel the anger rise, and instead of snapping, you study it. You sense tension in a room, and instead of avoiding it, you lean in. You detect the shift in someone's voice, not just what they said but what they meant. That's not weakness. That's emotional pattern recognition. And here's what most people don't realize. Emotional intelligence can be trained. Just like mental focus. Just like memory. It begins with awareness, sharpens with exposure, and strengthens with honest feedback. The kind most people are too scared to receive. But the system never prioritized this. Because people who can feel clearly, can see clearly, they're harder to manipulate, harder to gaslight, harder to divide. And in a world that benefits from your emotional confusion, clarity is rebellion. So don't just build a brilliant mind. Build one that understands tone, tracks energy, feels the shift beneath the surface, and responds with strategy, not survival. Because emotional intelligence isn't the opposite of genius. It's what makes genius human. At some point, the world starts to feel fake. You see the patterns, the manipulation, the systems inside the systems. You understand how narratives are crafted, how people are nudged, how emotions are pulled like levers. And so you pull back. You stop reacting. You observe more. You respond less. You detach. This is controlled detachment, a banned mental tool that lets you see the game without being played by it. It's not about apathy. It's not coldness. It's clarity. Because when you're emotionally fused with everything, every opinion, every headline, every reaction, you lose control of your mental architecture. Your thoughts aren't yours anymore. You're just responding to noise. But detachment lets you create space. Space between stimulus and response. Between reaction and intention. Between them and you. You start to see people's words for what they are. Scripts. You start to see systems not as truth but as structures. And you realize how much of your thinking was inherited, not chosen. Controlled detachment is how master thinkers operate. They're not less human. They're just less hijacked. They can listen to someone rage without absorbing it. They can see the chaos in the world and still keep a stable signal inside their own mind. They can be in the system without becoming of it. But here's the paradox. Too much detachment and you lose your humanity. Too little and you lose your mind. The skill is in the balance. Being able to step out far enough to see the machine. But return close enough to stay human. Because the mind that sees too clearly can go cold. And the heart that feels too much can drown. Controlled detachment is the bridge between both. And once you build it, you stop being a pawn in someone else's narrative and start writing your own. There comes a point where thinking harder doesn't help. Where another caffeine hit, another to-do list, another 12-hour grind just makes your brain feel heavier. You're not lazy. You're burning out. This is where most people collapse. But high-level thinkers? They tap into something else. Endurance thinking. Endurance thinking is the ability to stay mentally sharp, calm, and strategic over long periods of complexity. It's not about intensity. It's about sustainability. The kind of thinking that holds steady through chaos. That doesn't spike and crash. That outlasts the noise. Because brilliance isn't just measured in short bursts. It's measured in how long you can hold the signal. How long you can stay in the work without shutting down. How long your focus holds while others fade. Most people treat their brain like a sprint muscle. Burn it hot, then crash. But endurance thinkers treat it like a long-distance engine. They build in rhythms, cycles, reset points. They know when to go deep and when to breathe. This isn't taught in school, because the system values speed over longevity. Quick results over sustainable mastery. Memorize, test, forget. Produce, repeat, burnout. But that's not how genius works. Genius is paced. It's strategic stamina. It's knowing that rest isn't weakness. It's part of the programming. Because your brain isn't just a processor. It's an ecosystem. And ecosystems need balance to grow. So stop worshipping burnout. Start building capacity. Because the greatest thinkers didn't just arrive at insights. They stayed long enough with hard problems to let the answers find them. Your mind is not open. It's not free. It's being attacked, constantly. Not by weapons or viruses, but by something more dangerous. Mental pollution. This is the noise you didn't choose. The thoughts that aren't yours. The endless scroll. The flashing headlines. The manufactured outrage. Every alert, every algorithm, every bite-sized dose of dopamine. It's all part of a system designed to fill your brain with clutter. You were never meant to absorb this much, this fast, this often. And yet here we are, overstimulated, underfocused, chronically distracted. This is the war most people don't even realize they're in. And every time you open your phone, every time you scroll through an endless feed, every time you let someone else decide what enters your attention, you give up a little more control. That's what mental pollution does. It doesn't just overwhelm you. It rewires you. It shortens your attention span. It floods your memory cache. It hijacks your curiosity and replaces it with reaction. But here's the banned truth. You can build a mental firewall. You can choose what enters. You can filter the inputs. You can train your mind to spot garbage before it sticks. That's what the sharpest minds do. They're not just smart, they're defended. They protect their focus like a fortress. Because they understand the mind is sacred space. And you don't leave the gates open overnight. So if you feel foggy, slow, unfocused, it's not because you're broken. It's because you're breathing in toxic thought air. And the first step to clearing it is realizing that every thought you allow in is either sharpening your mind or slowly suffocating it. There's a moment, quiet and personal, where everything clicks. You realize your thoughts are no longer random. Your mind isn't drifting. It's directed. Dangerously clear. This is what happens when you master the final hack. The 5 unbreakable rules of controlled genius. They're not written in any textbook. But the most effective thinkers in the world follow them like code. Because without them, brilliance burns out. But with them, brilliance becomes inevitable. Rule 1. Master the input. Your brain becomes what you feed it. Content, conversation, environment. All of it writes code. Cure it ruthlessly. Treat your attention like currency. Rule 2, build systems, not bursts. Motivation fades. Systems don't. Train your brain to operate with consistency over hype. Habits over willpower. Structure over drama. Rule 3, obsess over the why. Not what to think, not how, but why. When your why is clear, thinking sharpens. Focus locks in. Distractions evaporate. Rule 4, think in motion. Ideas grow when they move. Simulate. Speak. Visualize. Let your thoughts breathe in 3D, not on static paper but in lived, moving form. Rule 5, protect the signal. Distraction is the enemy. Mental pollution is real. Protect your mind like it's a blueprint the world's trying to erase. These 5 rules don't make you a genius. They make sure you stay one. Because brilliance isn't a moment. It's a discipline. And when your brain follows these rules long enough, the world won't be able to ignore what it becomes. There's something terrifying about realizing this. You might not be the one in control of your thoughts. Not because someone's pulling the strings, but because everything, your habits, your patterns, your inner dialogue, is a result of unconscious code that was written when you weren't looking. This is the ultimate psychological trick. Your mind is using you. Not the other way around. You think you're choosing, but most of your decisions are reflexes. You think you're reasoning, but most of your logic is just post-rationalization for feelings you didn't create. You think you're in control, but what if you're just following scripts you didn't even know were installed? Your mind, as it is now, is the result of 1,000 invisible influences. Parents, teachers, culture, trauma, repetition, advertising, and each one shaped a part of your operating system. Now you react without deciding. You avoid without understanding. You chase things you don't even want, just because the loop has been running that long. And here's the twist. Even knowing this doesn't set you free. Because the loop adapts. It tells you what you want to hear. Pretends to be you. So how do you fight something that sounds like your own voice? You observe. You slow down. You interrupt automatic thoughts with questions. You reverse engineer your patterns. You study your own reactions like a stranger's. You reclaim your mind from itself. Because intelligence is one thing. But meta-intelligence, the ability to think about how you think, that's the level they never wanted you to reach. The moment you realize you're not your thoughts, is the moment you become more than just a passenger. You become the one holding the wheel. You've been told that your brain is what it is. Fixed, wired, unchangeable. That intelligence plateaus, habits define you, and personality is permanent. But that's not how the brain works. Not even close. This is neuroplasticity on demand. A banned brain hack that uses repetition, intensity, and self-awareness to reshape the architecture of your mind whenever you choose. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself. Every thought, every movement, every emotion, every repeated behavior forges a new neural pathway, and over time that pathway becomes easier to follow, until it becomes who you are. But here's what they didn't teach you. You can direct it. Most people reinforce their current wiring by accident. They repeat the same thought loops, the same negative self-talk, the same emotional responses, over and over, until their brain becomes a closed circuit. But plasticity means you can overwrite that. On purpose. Here's how. Repetition. Not just habits, but conscious, focused repetitions of new thoughts. New responses. New beliefs. Emotional intensity. The brain remembers what feels important. If you attach feeling to new wiring, it sticks faster. Self-observation. When you catch the old pattern as it happens, you weaken its grip. You strip it of momentum. This isn't visualization. It's not affirmation. It's cognitive engineering. And when you do it daily, when you start speaking new commands into your brain, pairing them with action and emotional energy, your default responses begin to change. Not because you tried harder, but because the old wiring was replaced. You're not stuck. You're programmable. And every time you make a new decision, you're either reinforcing the code you've been given, or writing the upgrade yourself. You feel it rising: anger, panic, sadness. Maybe it's triggered by something small, maybe something big. Either way, your body reacts before your mind can respond. Your pulse quickens. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts spiral. You're no longer in control. But here's the part they never taught you. That feeling will only last 90 seconds, unless you choose to keep it alive. This is the 90-second rule for emotional control, and it's one of the simplest, most powerful brain hacks ever discovered. And almost no one uses it. Here's how it works. When you're emotionally triggered, your brain releases a chemical surge into your body. That surge, adrenaline, cortisol, all of it, floods your system. But biologically, it only takes 90 seconds to be processed and flushed out. After that, if you're still angry, anxious, or upset, it's not the event. It's your thought loop that's keeping it alive. You're replaying the story, feeding it, keeping it burning. But if you do nothing, if you simply observe the sensation, breathe, and let it pass without engaging, you regain control. Not by suppression, not by force, but by mastering the space between feeling and reaction. This is what emotional alchemy looks like. Top performers use it to stay composed under pressure. Special forces use it in combat. High-stakes negotiators use it in silence. But you were never taught this. Because emotional reactivity is useful to systems that want you impulsive. A person who reacts is easy to manipulate. But a person who pauses, who waits out the storm, is dangerous. So the next time your emotions rise, don't fight them. Time them. Breathe. Count backward from 90. And watch as the wave passes, leaving you still, awake, and completely in control. You wake up, check your phone, scroll through headlines, posts, videos, texts, replies, updates, opinions. Before you've even had a real thought of your own, you've consumed 100 from other people. And your brain, already overwhelmed, starts to feel slow, foggy, unmotivated, disconnected. This is the silent cost of information overload. And the solution is what they don't want you to discover: information fasting. Your brain wasn't built to handle infinite input. It evolved to focus, to lock onto one thing with precision and stay there. But modern life floods it endlessly. You scroll through more data in a single day than your ancestors saw in a lifetime. And most of it is noise. Junk information has a cost. Not just time, but mental clarity. Clogs your memory, scrambles your focus, hijacks your intuition. And worst of all, it numbs your original thinking. Because if your brain is always processing what someone else thinks, it forgets how to hear you. Information fasting isn't about going off the grid. It's about reclaiming cognitive space. Here's how it works. Pick a window, an hour, a morning, a day. No inputs, no scrolling, no external voices, just silence, pen and paper. Thought without interruption. First it feels strange. Your mind fidgets, craves distraction. But then something clicks, and the signal returns. You start to hear your own thoughts again. Ideas bubble up from beneath the surface. Clarity sharpens. Priorities realign. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, your mind belongs to you again. Because intelligence isn't how much you consume. It's what you do with silence once everything else is turned off. You're standing in front of a mirror, not checking your hair, not adjusting your clothes, just looking. And slowly you realize, you're not just seeing yourself, you're seeing your programming. This is the mirror hack. A banned brain technique used to retrain your subconscious by pairing self-recognition with direct suggestion. It's not about confidence. It's not about motivation. It's about reclaiming control over your internal code by speaking directly to the person behind your eyes. Most people never realize this. Your reflection isn't just visual. It's neurological. Looking into your own eyes activates regions of the brain tied to identity, memory, and emotional patterning. It makes the moment real to your subconscious. So when you speak while looking at yourself, your mind listens differently. But the system trained you to ignore the mirror, to avoid eye contact with yourself, to criticize what you see, or worse, to feel nothing at all. The mirror hack flips that. Here's how it works. You pick a phrase, a belief, a new thought pattern, something you want your brain to install. Then you say it clearly out loud while looking directly at your own eyes. First, it feels strange, uncomfortable, even ridiculous. But after a few days, the resistance fades. After a week, the phrase starts echoing back. After a month, your brain stops questioning it, because the mirror never lies. And it just heard you say it 100 times. This is how you replace self-doubt with self-instruction. How you overwrite shame with clarity. How you reprogram not just what you think, but what you believe you are. Because if you can't convince the reflection to change, the mind behind it never will.